Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports, where today we are talking about how disappointing the Vancouver Canucks has been so far, as well as other news and notes around the NHL. Guys, as always, thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Make sure that you check out our website down below, i80sports.com, for all of our NHL coverage, as well as all of our NFL, NCAA football, NBA, MLS, and our wrestling content and our NBA content as well. I feel like I already mentioned NBA content, but it's okay. Forgetfulness is a major thing. But hey, in regards to updates on some of our different sports going on right now, you may have noticed that our buddy Bob has been doing a lot of stuff over on the MLS side of things. He's been doing a lot of live streaming lately, previewing all of the teams in the MLS leading up to the beginning of the MLS season. So you definitely want to check him out, as well as the other guests on his podcast right now. He has been on almost nightly. So if you're on our website, you can probably check him out nightly at this point, really kind of get to know some of the other teams in the MLS right now. While you're on our website, make sure that you check out our shop. Get yourself a t-shirt as low as $8, as well as the other new designs that are currently on our website. And if you are on Twitter, make sure you follow us down below at I80_SportsNHL. And if you follow us already, thank you all so much, because we greatly value all of your support. And hey, if you're on our website and not on YouTube, and weren't aware that we had a YouTube page, make sure you check us out down below, youtube.com/I80Sports. And while you're there, drop a like, hit subscribe, comment while you're there, hit the bell notification, all other cool things, YouTube stuff. Give us more people to watch. I'm Brian, he's Tom. Tom, how you doing? Also, there we go. That way. Tom, directions. I'm tired. Tom, how you doing today?
Doing well. And here we are, yet another week. It's been an interesting week in hockey. Some more disappointments, some more head scratchers, some more obvious things, some more not so obvious things. So let's just get right to it.
Yeah, we're going to get right along with this right now. So as always, guys, it is time right now to hit up our traffic report.
The I-80 Sports Traffic Report, where you can find all your news and notes from the week.
Pretty light week in news this week, but we still have a couple things that we need to cover real quick before we get to the focus of our video, which is about the Vancouver Canucks tonight. So, first and foremost, the Montreal Canadiens have decided, you know what? We need to make a change. We just lost to the New Jersey Devils 7-1 last night. They're a terrible team. We need a change, and they decided way too late to fire head coach Dominic Ducharme. And I'm just going to say it straight out. It was way too late. They should have made this decision a long time ago when they really started to be on that losing streak. But Dominic Ducharme has been relieved of his coaching duties, and taking over for him, at least in the interim, is a very interesting name, and also a very familiar name to a lot of hockey fans from the mid-2000s. You know him. You love him. You might not see him behind the bench because he might not peek over the bench with how tall he is. But his name is Martin St. Louis, former Tampa Bay Lightning member, former New York Ranger, just a decent hockey player all around. Not a lot of coaching experience, has some advisory experience. Tom, what do you think about this hiring? We can keep it quick on this one.
A little bit of a head scratcher, but I'll tell you what, this has Jeff Gorton written all over it. Jeff Gorton was assistant GM when St. Louis played for the Rangers. St. Louis worked in the front office the last few years when Gorton was there. St. Louis did have some on-ice experiences. He would go on the ice with the Rangers for some practices to help them work on certain facets of the game. I really just think that, you know what, the team was terrible. The media was probably ripping Ducharme a new one, even though the team wasn't supposed to be any good and are not any good. And I really just think that was, St. Louis telling Gorton, hey, maybe you want to give me a job up there. I'm looking to cut my teeth in coaching, because he did coach a little bit. But, I mean, come on, he coached AAA travel hockey. No disrespect to that, but that's obviously not pro hockey. So this is pretty much Jeff Gorton doing Marty St. Louis a favor. That's all. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, this has Jeff Gorton written all over it, and I don't think it's a bad hiring. I just think that this came way too late. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. This is a team that has only scored 100 goals this season. They're 30th in the entire NHL in goals for. In goals against, they're the worst in the NHL, 179 goals against. Now, granted, they haven't had Carey Price at all this year. They haven't had Shea Weber at all this year. They're missing some key faces from that Stanley Cup Finals team from this past year. But with only 8 wins so far this season, I just really feel like this was long overdue. And I feel like Montreal should have pulled the trigger back in November or December and just pulled the rug out from underneath Dominic Ducharme. I get it with the front office changing faces, but this should have been one of the first things to happen when there was new leadership in charge. And Martin St. Louis, best of luck turning this club around. It's not like it's a horrible team. They're just severely underperforming right now. There's still no player on this roster that's cracked 10 goals. I'm literally looking right now. It's a mess. Nick Suzuki hasn't even cracked 10 goals. Tyler Toffoli hasn't even cracked 10 goals this season. This is ugly, 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 ugly. But you know what? Maybe hope ahead for the Montreal Canadiens moving forward. Martin St. Louis, best of luck in your endeavors. And Dominic Ducharme, if we find you in the NHL again in some coaching capacity, best of luck to you and whatever your future endeavors may hold for you. But let's talk about some quick hits real quick before we dive into the Vancouver Canucks being our focus today's episode. So some quick hits for today. Tuukka Rask, or should I say former goaltender Tuukka Rask, has officially announced his retirement from the NHL, stating that his body just isn't keeping up with what he wants to be able to do. And yeah, anybody that's kind of watched him on the ice can say the same thing. He hasn't been the same goaltender since he's returned, since he came back a few weeks ago. So Tuukka Rask, best of luck in your retirement with whatever you decide to do with your life moving forward, maybe finding a way back into hockey later on. I would not be the least bit surprised if he does that, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't. But, best of luck. You had a fantastic career. Nothing to hang your head on. Stanley Cup winning goaltender. What more can you ask for there? Next, former NHL defenseman, former New Jersey Devils and Anaheim Ducks defenseman Scott Niedermayer has joined the Anaheim Ducks as a special advisor, maybe kind of dipping his fingers into a front office role, maybe moving forward. Could be really interesting. He's now joining Pat Verbeek with the Anaheim Ducks, so a bit of a odd Devils reunion there going on. I don't know.
I'm not sure they ever played together with the Devils. To tell you the
Maybe
truth.
a year when
I'm not sure they ever did. I think by the time Niedermayer came up, Verbeek may have been in Hartford already.
He might have been, but even still, just found it interesting to say the least. There's the New Jersey connection there. Just interesting in general. Next, the St. Louis Blues have re-signed head coach Craig Berube to a 3-year extension. Decent move. He's been perfectly fine in St. Louis, and the players very much respect him there. Moving right along. Speaking of moving right along, the Olympics are happening. Moving right along. Mm-hmm. So much to do about nothing there. So, all right, let's get into the main topic of discussion here. It's time to talk about the Vancouver Canucks. That's why you clicked on this video. So it's time, as always, to pump the brakes.
Not so fast. It's time to pump the brakes.
I also realized that Tom may have wanted to say something.
Yeah, just before we go to the Canucks, Verbeek's last year in Jersey was 89. He was in Hartford in 90, so I don't think, those two didn't play together.
Oh, well. At least Niedermayer was a thought of
if I didn't look it up, I was going to be sitting here and it was going to be racking my brain the rest of the show.
Oh my god, that was funny. All right, that was good. All right, so let's talk about Vancouver. And why are we talking about Vancouver tonight? Well, it's just because it's not like they're a horrible team right now, but I just feel like they're just an underachieving team right now. This is a team that is destined for more than what they have shown so far. So let's talk about how disappointing Vancouver has been so far and how they can kind of pick it up in the future, because I don't see this team, as opposed to what we talked about with Philadelphia last week, I don't see this as a team that is currently in a rebuild, problem at the moment, but this could very well be a playoff team by year's end. So let's talk about it right now. So what's their current record? They are 21-20-6, which is good for 48 points in the Pacific Division. They're currently sitting in 6th place in the Pacific Division at the moment. But it's really, really, really close right now. Because if we look at the standings, meaning today's date is February 9th. And according to the standings right now, going from bottom to top, the Seattle Kraken is in last with 34 points. They're not making the playoffs. It's just not happening. The Vancouver Canucks are next with 48 points, tied with the San Jose Sharks with 48 points. So it's technically deadlocked at 6th place. In 5th place, 1 point above them is the Edmonton Oilers. And then not too far behind with only 4 points out from 4th place right now is the Calgary Flames with 52 points. But then you just keep going up. The Los Angeles Kings and the Anaheim Ducks both tied with 55 points in 2nd place. And then right above there is the Vegas Golden Knights with 59 points. So realistically, Vancouver's not that far behind right now. So that's number one. Who are some leading scorers right now for the Vancouver Canucks? This is where things get a little bit more interesting and a little bit more disappointing. So leading the team right now is JT Miller with 46 points. He's a point per game player right now, over a point per game player at the moment. Next is Quinn Hughes with 34 points. Only two of which are goals. So the majority has actually come on assists. And then in third is Elias Pettersson with 26 points. So quite the drop off. Interesting to note here, tied beneath Elias Pettersson are 3 players with 25 points. Bo Horvat, Brock Besser, Connor Garland. We'll come back to those names. So what are some identified problems right now with the Vancouver Canucks? Where do these problems potentially stem from? So biggest thing, early season. Early season, the Vancouver Canucks were not one of the better teams in the NHL. How did they solve that? They fired Travis Green. They hired Bruce Boudreau. And Bruce Boudreau, as the head coach of the Vancouver Canucks, has done quite well since taking over as head coach. He's 13-5-4 as of this recording. And he took over for Travis Green at around the quarter season mark. And I'll admit, I scratched my head a little bit when they went for Bruce Boudreau, but I'm eating my words. Bruce Boudreau has done a fine job as head coach of the Vancouver Canucks. That being said, this team is having difficulty finding the back of the net at the moment. They have scored 120 goals, which currently ranks 25th out of 32 teams in the league. This is a team that should honestly have no trouble scoring, especially given the names that I even mentioned above. They have a decent defense and decent goaltending that has done quite well keeping pucks out of the net. They've only allowed 127 goals this year, 11th in the entire league. And other than that, this team flat out just needs to finish. This team just needs to find the back of the net. They need to score. And, maybe it means that some players need a fresh start somewhere else. So what are I can't speak. What are some trade targets for the Vancouver Canucks? Brock Besser is a name that's been floated around. Connor Garland is another name that's been floated around in trade talks. Bo Horvat as maybe a reach name for other teams to maybe see if they can acquire for. And just for giggles, Yaroslav Halak, just because goaltending is a hot commodity always in the NHL, especially with all the injuries lately to a lot of teams, Buffalo to New Jersey, teams that are in desperate need of goaltending help at the moment. Yaroslav Halak could be an interesting name that could be out there as a temporary fix. And, what does Vancouver currently have in the pipeline? All I really see here, Jack Rathbone. That's really about it. That's really all I can find because a lot of their younger players are currently up and developing in the NHL. Vasily Podkolzin is one of those names that's currently developing in the NHL right now, as well as Niels Höglander, who's also, in his sophomore season in the NHL. So with all of this context that I just mentioned, Tom, let's start with you. I know you have quite a bit to say because you're going to give us a little bit of a lineage on, where Vancouver was years ago and kind of parallels to that team versus now. And I'm going to give you the floor to be able to do that. I'm going to give you plenty of time for this. What does Vancouver need to do to take proper steps in the right direction for this season?
Well, I'm going to go off topic real quick. I'm going to go back to what Montreal just did. They just announced Vinny Lecavalier they're bringing in as their assistant GM to Kent Hughes. I just want to get that out there. I'm just stating it. We don't talk about it. I'm just putting it out there. Okay, now to go completely across to the other side of Canada and the Vancouver Canucks. My answer about this, it's a little bit of a head scratcher again, like I alluded to before with what happened in Montreal. They kind of parallel each other in a weird way. If you look at the history of the Canucks, the Canucks were, to start, they were kind of that lovable loser team. They were brought into the league in 1971, so Western Canada could finally have a team. The people out there, didn't have to worry about rooting for the Habs or the Leafs who were all the way across the country. You had the Canucks. In 1971, there were no Calgary Flames or Edmonton Oilers or Winnipeg Jets in the NHL. So the Canucks were Western Canada's team for many, many years. And for many years, they were kind of just that lovable loser team. They were losers, but it was Western Canada's team. Then it was, okay, well, it's the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia's team, because after that, Edmonton, Calgary, Winnipeg all came in, and the Canucks were kind of just the whipping boy for the rest of the Smythe division. Things sort of started to change when you got to the late 80s. You had Pat Quinn as your GM. You had Brian Burke as your assistant GM. And they finally kind of started to build the team into respectability. You drafted guys like Trevor Linden. You were able to get guys like Pavel Bure out of the Soviet Union. And that culminated in that 1994 Stanley Cup Finals, which I'm sick of talking about, but needs to be talked about right here. They pushed the Rangers to 7 games. There's some Canuck fans who think they should have won that 7th game. Guys, I hate to rain on your parade, but it was one goalpost and one blown offsides call. If Leach's goal would have went in game 1 in OT, that series is over in 4. That Tikkanen goal in game 5, you got lucky, because if you had coaches' challenges back in 94, that Tikkanen goal in game 5 would have counted. That series been over in 5. That's the Ranger fan in me. That's the end of that. After they lost in 94 in 7 games, and man, they put on a hell of a performance in those finals, they did what anyone else would have done. They tried to get back there again. And on top of trying to get back there again, at the time, Vancouver was a new and upcoming city. They moved out of the aging Pacific Coliseum into what was then the GM place. Now it's Rogers Center. They tried to make the team better. They brought in Alexander McGillney in 96 to play with his old Russian buddy, Pavel Bure. And then in 96, the summer of 96, they finally had a chance to put the cherry on top of all of it. They had the greatest player of all time, all but signed. That player, Wayne Gretzky. They had him signed, verbally agreed to a deal. Gretzky was coming back to Canada. Gretzky was going to play with Bore and McGillney. Gretzky and the Canucks might turn some heads. Until they decided to be overly aggressive and call Wayne Gretzky at 4 o'clock in the morning and said, you decide now or you don't play here. So you know what Wayne Gretzky said? I'm not playing here. So then the next year they did what anyone else would have done. They went after the next biggest commodity, Mark Messier. Here was the problem. In 1997, Mark Messier was finally starting to show that he was old, that he wasn't in his prime anymore. The other teams that talked to Messier that offseason, including his former team, the Rangers, and teams like the Washington Capitals, knew this. They knew he was in decline. They knew he was not a first-line center anymore. They knew he was not a 100-point player anymore, a 40-goal player anymore. The Canucks figured, well, we didn't get Gretzky, so we got to get this guy. So they basically wheelbarrowed in a ton of money for Mark Messier. Messier came in and basically sort of destroyed the franchise. He took the C away from Trevor Linden. He wore the number 11, which was sort of out of circulation, never retired, but out of circulation for Wayne Mackey, who died of cancer. He forced Pat Quinn out of town. He brought his boy Mike Keenan in. He forced Trevor Linden out of town, who was, the most beloved Vancouver Canuck up until that time outside of Pavel Bure. Despite all of this, and them being the biggest dumpster fire in the league in 1998, they were able to come out of it. Brian Burke was brought back as the GM. He was able to draft well, drafting both the Sedin brothers. He was able to correct some mistakes. He brought Trevor Linden back to Vancouver, and he was able to trade well. He brought in guys like Todd Bertuzzi and Brendan Morrison. Marcus Naslund was brought in by Pat Quinn way back in 96, which was a dumb trade. Naslund was in Pittsburgh. I still don't know why they got rid of him. Anyways, in the early 2000s, you had that team that they called the West Coast Express, the team that shunned the neutral zone trap, shunned the dead puck area. You had the first line of Bertuzzi, Morrison, and Naslund. And in those sort of mid-2000 years, 2003 and 2004 to be exact, a lot of people were thinking, wow, this team is one step away from maybe winning a Stanley Cup. In 2003, they were in first place most of the season. They choked the division to the Avalanche on the last day of the season, but you could tell it was there. They were able to come back from a 3-1 deficit against St. Louis, those playoffs. They lost to Minnesota, but still it was there. And in 2004, I think a lot of people were like, oh, wow, these Canucks are for real. These Canucks, they might be the team that wins the Stanley Cup. Until Todd Bertuzzi decided to punch Steve Moore in the back of the head and get himself suspended for the entire playoffs. So basically, that was the end of the West Coast Express. They were still together, but they were never thought of as a contender again. But yet the Canucks were able to get themselves out of that hole too. Those guys were eventually gone. The team was put on the back of the Sedins, and they brought in Roberto Luongo as well. So you had the Sedins and Luongo. And slowly but surely in the late 2000s, they started building themselves back into a contender. You had those series in 2009 and 2010 with Chicago Blackhawks where they played each other hard, but the Blackhawks won. Finally, in the 2010-2011 season, the Canucks were a dominant team. They were the top team in the league, and myself included thought, wow, the Canucks are finally going to win it this year. They got by Chicago in the first round. They beat Nashville. They beat San Jose in the Western Conference Final, and there they were in the finals. And I myself thought, the Bruins are going to give them a little bit of a challenge, but I think the Canucks are going to come away with this cup. The problem with the Canucks was this. They didn't realize that, oh, wow, maybe you have to steal a game on the road, and you actually have to win 4 games in the finals to win the Stanley Cup. And they just let up and eat. The games in Boston that year in the finals were like a circus. It was like a scene at a slap shot. The Bruins pretty much pushed the Canucks around. I mean, I'm not even going to describe it. You can go on YouTube and watch the highlights of that final. The games in Boston were a freaking circus. The Bruins had their way with them, and it wasn't even funny. And then watch Game 4. The Bruins came into Vancouver and walked out of there as Stanley Cup champions. To this day, there's Vancouver Canuck fans who are still upset about that. They just didn't play. So, after that, they had blown their chance at that. They still had good teams the next few years, but just weren't good enough to win. So now here we are. Here we are in the present time. And you have solid pieces like Elias Pettersson, Brock Besser, Bo Horvat, and Quinn Hughes. And finally in that bubble 2 years ago, they started to turn a little bit of heads. They had my attention, to tell you the truth. They were very good those playoffs. I just want to bring something up with them real quick. I'm sorry, guys. I clicked on the wrong thing. I just want to bring something up from those playoffs, and I thought I had it up, and I didn't. So here's some dead air. We can edit this out if we want. But if you look at the Canucks those years, they were able that year. They were able to get themselves out of the wild card round. They went up against the Minnesota Wild. They went up against the Minnesota Wild in the preliminary round. They beat them 3-1. Then you go to the quarterfinals, and I'm just trying to buy some more time here. They were able to knock off the defending Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues, beat them in 6 games, and I wouldn't say in dominating fashion, but you know what? They were able to take care of business. You knocked off the defending Stanley Cup champions. Now, if you go to this conference semifinals, they played against Vegas. They took Vegas to 7 games. 7 games. They were down 3-1, came back 4-7. They lost the last game 3-0. But I'm sitting here looking at Vancouver after that game, and I said, you know something? People talk about the Oilers. People talk about Vegas. People talk about Colorado. But don't write these Vancouver Canucks off. However, you go into last year. Before the season, they let Jacob Markstrom go, who was their rock those playoffs. And you brought in Braden Holtby. And I remember at the time, too, I'm like, you know what? This is sort of an improvement. You're bringing in Braden Holtby. He's been deep into the playoffs. He's won a Stanley Cup in D.C., but I don't think Holtby ever wanted to leave D.C. in the first place. He was sort of forced out. The other problem with Holtby was he didn't want to be there. That no-fan situation and terrible travel last year was terrible for the Canucks. You look at the way they mapped the divisions out last year, the travel for the Canucks was terrible. They had the worst traveling schedule of anybody else. Also letting a depth guy like Tyler Toffoli go wasn't good either. As we know in the league nowadays, your top 6 can be great, but you need good depth to go anywhere in this league. So now, the issue with the Canucks, in my eyes, is goaltending and depth. But here's the other problem with goaltending and depth. As we've learned, if you spend too much money on goaltending and depth, you lose those top players. So basically, it's a catch-22. You don't have the goaltending and depth to go deep in the playoffs, But at the same time, you have the money to spend on that. But if you spend that money in the goaltending in depth, then it's your top guys who you may have to let walk in a few years. So basically, I think this year bringing in Bruce Boudreau was a good move. Maybe it should have happened a little bit earlier. And I think they hired him a little too late. To tell you the truth, what's different about this Canucks team as opposed to the others I brought up with the cores they had is that this core is still fairly young. And I do think you can give it one more year under Boudreau. I think they need to give a full year under Boudreau next year and see where this goes. Because I think they still have a fairly young core. In the past with the guys like with the Borés, with the Messiers, with Naslin, with the Sedins, all those guys were at the peak of their prime or starting to decline in their prime. This team still is very young. And I think that maybe if you just give them one more year to finally straighten this out, I think that they could do it. That's a positive, if you ask me. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you. I can't hear you, Brian. Brian, I can't hear you.
My bad. It happens. So all really good points that Tom made here. To me, this is puzzling because it's not like this is a bad team on paper. You look at this roster, and this is a pretty skilled team. Also a really young team, as Tom had mentioned. This is a team that should be in playoff contention as of right now, but they're just not scoring. There have been some disappointments on this team, and I'll just flat out say Elias Pettersson, Bo Horvat, Brock Besser, and Connor Garland have not stepped up in the way Vancouver fans have hoped. And you just look at their numbers, 26 points for Elias Pettersson. Let me give you guys the real breakdown in terms of points from all of these players right now. So for Elias Pettersson, his 26 points breaks down as this: 12 goals, 14 assists. Bo Horvat, 25 points. That's 14 goals and 11 assists. Brock Besser, 25 points again, 13 goals, 12 assists. And Connor Garland, 25 points, once again, 11 goals, 14 assists. And interesting to note here, there is some separation between Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson. So 34 points for Hughes, 26 points for Pettersson. And then going all the way up to the top with JT Miller, 46 points. That's a difference of 20 points. JT Miller, mind you, 16 goals, 30 assists. He has done very, very well. Also a +6. Elias Pettersson is a -1 right now. Bo Horvat, -2. Brock Besser, -5. Connor Garland, surprisingly a +8. But even still, it's not like this team is bad. This team has growing pains right now. Vasily Podkolzin is having massive growing pains in the NHL right now. 44 games played, 11 points, 7 goals, 4 assists. I think he's a player that could start picking it up. He does have limited ice time right now. He has an average ice time at the moment of about 12 and a half minutes, which is to be expected. He's a bottom 6 player at the moment, and they're not trying to rush him into a top 6 role. They don't need to rush him into a top 6 roles with the guys that I've already mentioned. You've got guys right now that are averaging more minutes right now. JT Miller is averaging 21 minutes a night at the moment. Elias Pettersson is averaging 18. Bo Horvat's averaging 20. Brock Besser's averaging 19. Connor Garland is the only one that's below there with 16 minutes logged. Same with Tanner Pearson. But this team is still developing. That being said, their main faces, their main names are the ones that really need to step up here. And in my mind, I feel like Connor Garland looks like a potential trade target at this point. There have been some interesting teams inquiring about Garland because of his current term. Looking over a cap friendly right now, he's currently locked up all the way through 2026, 2027 right now. And it's a pretty friendly contract at 25 years of age. He's making just under $5 million a year. And for a guy with his production and of his top 6 caliber that he brings to the table, to be locked up for that term, I think Vancouver would be really, really happy to maybe try to trade him maybe this season, see if they can get something, maybe just say, hey, you know what? This was not a match that ended up working. He doesn't quite work out here. See what you can get. I don't think you need to do that, though. But I think what could be in Vancouver's best interest, especially if they want to wake up this team, trading somebody on this team could be the wake-up call that Vancouver needs, just to say, hey, none of you guys are untouchable. Go ahead and trade a Connor Garland. Go ahead and trade a Brock Besser. Now, is it in the best interest of Vancouver to do this if they don't get something right in return? No. That being said, the teams that you might be asking could give you something interesting in return. New Jersey could give you something interesting in return. Montreal could give you something interesting. Ottawa can give you something interesting. Ottawa, mind you, is a team that could be really, really interesting watching as we approach the trade deadline, because they're not too far behind in the standings either right now. And maybe poaching from a team like Vancouver and make it an even swap of skills could be something that we could see at the trade deadline in March. I don't think the recent disappointment has been a fault of Bruce Boudreau. I feel he has done a really good job getting this team in the right direction, and I agree with Tom. I want to see one more year of Bruce Boudreau with this current lineup to see if this team can truly perform, if this is a team that really is destined to be a playoff contender, be a Stanley Cup contender someday. They have the right pieces in place. I think Thatcher Demko has been perfectly fine in net as of late. Thatcher Demko, in terms of his stats this year, he's had 35 starts. He's really been, just an absolute force, playing almost every single game. Yaroslav Halak has only found himself in 9 games this season, 8 of which were starts. And in Thatcher Demko's case, 18 wins, 15 losses. He's sporting a .919 save percentage and a 2.57 goals against. You can't ask for much more from a goaltender. You can't ask for much more. He is doing just fine right now. He's been doing very well. The defense has been picking him up as well. Could this defense be a little bit more mobile, admittedly? Yes. That might be an area that Vancouver would maybe look to see if they can improve on. Get yourself a defenseman that's a little bit more mobile, but then again, you're not really going to be able to part with Oliver Ekman-Larsson or Tyler Myers, especially with both of their contracts at the moment. So that's kind of a non-starter. That all being said, maybe one trade to kind of kick this team in the behind and just say, hey, we can do better than this, might not be a bad idea. Trading a Connor Garland could be advantageous if they get the right deal. They're not going to get the right deal if he's not performing right now, though, which is the main point of all this. Garland needs to step up. Besser needs to step up. Horvat needs to step up. And Pettersson needs to step up. So hopefully, over the course of the next few weeks, over the course of the next month, as we slowly approach the trade deadline, I think we are going to see an uptick in production from these 4 players. And with the Pacific being as close as it is currently, now is the right time for Vancouver to currently turn things around in the hopes for a playoff run. Capitalize on certain teams maybe falling by the wayside, maybe, having a bit of a losing streak. You got to hope for San Jose to maybe come back down to earth. You got to hope for Edmonton to maybe trip over their own 2 feet like they normally do. You got to hope for Calgary to maybe stop the momentum. But, there's plenty of room right now for Vancouver to pick it up. So we might say that they're a disappointment right now, but we're only saying a disappointment based on their current lineup. That being said, they're not going to be a disappointment if they make the playoffs ultimately. So I'm still hopeful that Vancouver makes the playoffs. I know Tom is still hopeful that Vancouver makes the playoffs. And certainly if they don't, we're going to be revisiting this and really talking about what went wrong, what went right, and what went wrong. And hopefully we don't have to get to that point. But Vancouver, find the back of the net already. Score like we know you can. All right. Let's move away from Vancouver. Let's start wrapping things up. It's time to talk about some players of the week. Let's talk high performance.
Your I-80 Sports High Performance Players of the Week.
Now, I know we had the All-Star break in the middle of all this, all those fun shenanigans, Jack Hughes pulling a child out of his hat, and Trevor Zagras, pulling the whole average Joe's out of his back pocket. I'm not going to lie, that was actually kind of cool. But gimmicks aside, we did have some players that did perform pre-All-Star break and post-All-Star break. So, Tom, who are some guys that you want to highlight this week?
Well, Claude Giroux with that All-Star Game MVP performance, and maybe the last thing he'll ever do, big thing he'll ever do as a member of the Flyers. Read up a little bit on Giroux this week in his contract, and I didn't realize, and we didn't discuss this last week, that he does have a no-movement clause. Now, I said this year it's highly unlikely that we'll see Giroux finish the season in a Flyers jersey, yes. But I'll tell you what, I'll be shocked if he's wearing a jersey that's not the Colorado Avalanche by the time the regular season ends, because at this point, I think all signs are pointing to Colorado, and I think the ball is in his court as well. Another one, and I hate to do this, but I got to give it credit where credit's due, with Sidney Crosby. He had that big goal last night against the Bruins. Bruins were up 2-0 cruising, with the lead. Danton Heinen, former Bruin, comes back in and pots two, and Crosby just puts the cherry on top by potting a power play goal. So I got to give it to Crosby as well. Those are my two right now.
Who's not in that top players of the week, especially after last night's game? Brad Marchand. If you want to go look at the cavalcade of stupidity from him last night, he's going to be having an in-person hearing sometime soon. I would not be surprised if we're talking about next week how Brad Marchand has been suspended for a few games, but we'll get to that next week. Players of the week for me, Patrick Laine has been doing quite well as of late. He's been doing good hockey things. 6 goals in the past 2 weeks. He's done quite well. Mitchell Marner, I just love using his full name. It's just weird. Actually been kind of impressing me lately. I got to admit, I will always be that first person to say that Mitch Marner is one of the most overrated players in the entire league. 7 goals, 7 assists in his past 2 weeks. You know what? He's been outperforming Austin Matthews right now. And Austin Matthews has 6 goals and 6 assists. And
now Austin Matthews is injured.
Ooh, that's going to be interesting to talk about next week.
He's got a concussion, I think.
Even better. I mean, then again, he also walks through life like he has a concussion too. So, oh well. The last player I want to highlight here, ironically, is not even in the NHL, but it will be sometime soon down the line. You know him, and especially if you saw that goal of the year candidate from this past week, you especially know this name, Connor Bedard. If you don't know already, this kid is insane. This kid is so good at hockey. He has some of the slickest mitts I have seen in quite some time. If you have not gotten the chance to look up his goal from this past week with Regina, you need to look it up like now, because that was an impressive goal. Toe drag so hard around a defender and then through the legs top shelf on a goaltender. Impressive. Just so impressive. This kid is destined for greatness someday, and he could very well be the number 1 overall pick in next year's NHL draft. Not 2022, but 2023. Going to be interesting to watch, but those are my players of the week. But it's time to wrap things up. Time for our question of the day, as always. Our question of the day, related to Vancouver, as we always do. We relate it back to the topic. So, Tom, I turn it over to you. Is Vancouver a playoff team with bad luck, or are they just bad right now?
Well, to summarize what I said above, they are a playoff team with some bad luck. It just seems like in the bubble where they looked like they were ready to take that next step, every possible bad thing has happened to them. And that's a microcosm of the entire history of the Vancouver Canucks since sometime in 1991.
Yeah, and for me, I agree. This is a playoff team with bad luck right now. And with the Pacific being as tight as it is, I do see them potentially squeaking into the playoffs by year's end. Maybe not even squeaking, maybe even higher than that. But we're just going to have to see. That's why these games are played. But as always, guys, what do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you disagree with our takes? Let us know down below in the comments section below. While you're there, drop a like. Also, subscribe if you're not subscribed already. And if you want to find us elsewhere besides YouTube, you can check out our website down below, i80sports.com, and check out, besides our NHL content, you can also check out our NFL, MLS, NCAA football, NBA, and wrestling content there as well. While you're there, hit up the shop, get yourself a t-shirt as low as $8. And if you're on Twitter, make sure you follow us down below at I80_sportsNHL. And if you follow us already, thank you guys so much. Without you guys, we can't do this on a weekly basis. But time to move away from this. Time to watch some hockey this week. Have fun watching some hockey this week. Maybe not Olympic hockey, though. But, yeah, had to add that in there. But, guys, thank you all for joining us here again. I'm Brian. He's been Tom. This has been yet another episode of NHL on I80 Sports.